special guest is Steve Quayle. His website is stevequayle.com. Please visit it often for the latest and needed information that you need to prepare for what's coming. And if you could hear some of our conversations we're having during the break, I mean, they would make for great show material. And I want to revisit something that Steve and Annie and I were talking about off air here during the top of the hour break. And Steve, that has to do with our own RBN's John Moore, ex-Green Beret, ex-military intelligence. And he's telling me about how 12 commandos broken up into 2 6-man teams can basically destroy the infrastructure of a city, destroy their water, mix sewage with water, dump chemicals in. Let me throw it back to you for your response.
Well, first of all, that's a normal terrorist plan of battle, and that would be in the gray terror phase. Taking down a power grid is relatively easy, especially when you know that everything you can pretty well find it on the internet. It used to have to be done, by the way, with bombs or explosives or some way of shorting it out. Now you can do it through cyber attacks, which is part of the plan to do too. So I think that people have got to understand, Dave, that the day comes when you're no longer on the radio or on the internet. I'm no longer on the radio or the internet, and all this stuff they have dismissed unto their own destruction. Look, it's all plain, and God gave me a word, and I'll give the Lord the glory, because He's the one that no one could have known this statement to make it. Yet I made it a decade ago, where the Lord said, before America's destroyed by the Russians and by the Chinese, I will reveal the sins of the leaders to the people and the people's sins before their God. Well, ladies and gentlemen, whether you believe in God or not, that's a pretty powerful statement in light of everything that's being revealed. Nothing's been nothing's been hidden. And Dave, do you think that the people that voted for the current administration would even care? It was proven, number one, he's not allowed to be president. Number two, he's already signed articles of surrender. Number three, he was put into office as one of the biggest spy operations in the history of espionage. Do you think they would even care? My answer is no, they won't care. Because, again, we have a generation that has completely been gifted the greatest country in the world. And when I say generation, I'll say I was born in 1951, so I'm 62. So I would say this, that from anybody born in the 50s and into the 60s, but after that, most everyone started to recognize that the country was going through a transformation, especially with Vietnam, especially with the politics, especially with mind control. And that's when Marshall McLuhan made his famous statement that the media is the message. So we are numbed and dumbed down. The chemtrails. I can't tell you how hard I fought in the early years of broadcasting to people to understand it. I could quote every patent. There were 10 of them that I could quote at that time. Or whether HARP 4686605. And all this stuff I committed to memory. So when somebody says, well, I don't believe that. Well, you may not believe it, but the U.S. Patent Office issued a patent for it. So the point is, in all of this, is they're killing us in every way. The food, the GMO food, deadly, deadly, deadly. The chemtrails, deadly, deadly, deadly. And, oh, by the way, if you want to see Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's disease, all of those diseases increase, you can literally superimpose the charts of chemtrail spraying over those years to that. It's so devastatingly in your face. But I tell people this: Americans are like a bunch of people that believe that if they close their eyes and put their fingers in the ears and start to hum to themselves, they're not going to get shot up against the wall. Because it doesn't matter what evidence you give them. And one time I was really frustrated, and I think this is a great point. I mean, really frustrated, usually frustrated, but this time I was really frustrated. And I said, Lord, why do you have me on talk radio pouring my heart out to people that don't want to listen? And I thought God would say, well, because, this or that. He said as a testimony against them. You realize this, Dave, that everybody who reads one of your articles is therefore responsible? And if they read your articles not knowing the lateness of the hour, especially on the FEMA camps and being broken up, I mean, most families, God bless families. They're under attack like never in the history of the world. But husbands will be separated from wives, and I won't even go into the details of the stuff that I was shown 40 years ago in a vision. I touched on it, and I hide things in my heart because I've said over and over and over, and I think you'll come to this point, maybe you're already there. Jesus said, if I've showed you earthly things and you believe me not, how can I show you heavenly things? And so if denial is in every realm, you know, I mean, even when Jesus was working the miracles, raising the dead, healing the sick, casting out demons, cleansing the lepers, people still would go, well, I think he's just a fraud. You know, the people of that time suffered from normalcy bias like everybody at every time does. And the only thing that you and I can do, and the others on talk radio, is to keep continually putting it before the people, like even tonight, while you and I are on the radio, somebody's just sent me an email. I finally get it. Well, I don't know what that finally get it mode or moment is, but I'm praying tonight that people finally get it. Go ahead, sir.
Well, Steve, those that get it in the 45 seconds we got to break, and we can continue after the break, of course, what can they do other than surrender to the Almighty, live their life accordingly, and brace for what's coming? How can people brace?
Well, first of all, they have to understand that everything that is going to be provided for them, their family, they have to be able to be the provider for it. You trust God with what only He can do, but you do the possible. It's like people being one of the founders of the prepper movement or survival movement, 40 years ago, which I am. The bottom line is I can't, when somebody says they're a prepper and God's really told them to prepare and they have the financial capability and don't even have storage food, a water filter, sleeping bags, or a basic firearm protection, I say, you don't even believe it. You don't have the fruit. You're an unwise virgin. Somebody says, well, that's so harsh. That's so snippy. No, it's pragmatic. You must understand there's no one coming to your rescue. The Lone Ranger is dead. The Tooth Fairy was a fake. And the only one who will come to your rescue is the living God, because the Scripture says, and it shall come to pass, all who call upon the name of the Lord Jesus shall be saved. And saved from what? If you don't understand what's coming against you, that'll put that word salvation in a major new context.
Yeah, what's coming against us is striking. To put a little bit of a cap on what we've talked about, what I've been told is when martial law goes into effect and the Russians and Chinese are running rampant in the country, being the enforcers of this martial law under the UN banner, that the Chinese have been promised the infrastructure and land because of the debt, and the Russians have been promised they can loot everything that they can get their hands on. Does that match with what you've been told?
Yes, and even Hawk was privy to a conversation, I think a recorded conversation of a Canadian general. By the way, the Canadians are in on this, just talking about those stupid Americans. This was the conversation, as best I can remember, from years back. Don't they understand that when they all go in the camps, they don't come out and we get all their stuff? That's paraphrasing it, okay? Now, that's a Canadian general. That caused a whole lot of stir. But you know what? How about this? Where's everybody screaming? Congress, senators, why aren't there immediate recall petitions going out saying, you can't let this country go this way? Can I tell you something? In my when we go into the xenogenesis, I have an answer for that. And
well, let's hold that answer, Steve. We're going to go to break. So when we come out, I'm going to have you pick it up right there with xenogenesis. And Steve, let's bridge the gap between what we've been talking about and where we're going with xenogenesis.
Well, first of all, I want to bring up Japan because a friend of mine, David, just asked me to Japan as a trigger. When there's so much stuff to cover, but Japan, I've told that in the last 24 to 36 hours since Kiev and since the whole Ukrainian Crimea thing, they've had some really interesting talks going on. They are beside themselves as seeing the weakness of the United States, and obviously we're sworn to protect them. I don't know all the recriminations, but Japan will be the trigger. On my website, I think you can go on it and find Brother Bob's Vision. Well, I have a section called Dreams and Visions. This was given years ago, and I mean a lot of years ago. And Japan right now is in a quandary, especially with the financial machinations going on with the U.S. dollar, because for years the yen carry trade, which just simply meant the Japanese would loan out yen at no interest, and then that yen obviously had to be brought back into the country. But there's so many derivative based investments on the Japanese yen, and where Japan used to think that they could trust the United States, especially in a conflict with China. If anyone knows Japan's treaty, they couldn't have strategic weapons, but now they're changing that. They're even talking about having nukes, and China in the background has said, we're not going to allow them to have nukes. So my sources today have told me that within the next several weeks to a month, and this is for David's benefit and everyone else's benefit, that there's going to be an embargo behind the scenes taking place on Japan. He was uncertain at this point, my source, whether it would be a literal maritime and military embargo. But ladies and gentlemen, if you don't think that the world is more dangerous today than it was a month ago, you really have to take stock of what's going on now. So Japan will be the trigger financially. It'll spread from Japan. It will obviously, because that's in the Far East and they're hours ahead of us, quite a few hours ahead of us, then, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go into the Middle East, they'll go into Europe, and it'll hit the United States, and that will be the trigger. I don't know what the actual event is. I'm being told that it will be a cyber attack.
I think I do know. It could be a cyber attack, but let me tell you what I have privy to, and I really can't reveal the source, so people have to take this as anecdotal face value. But I saw from sources in the 90s that this was rehearsed before. The takedown of the global economy starting with Japan, but you don't start with Japan, you start in other markets. And the elite have played this game called the arbitrage game for years, where they move currency denominations from one market to other and play one off against the other, where they make tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in a fell swoop. It takes $30 million minimum back in the 90s to get into this money game. But they actually did a scenario where they wanted to start a global crisis with Japan. So they built up currency in such a way that when the Japanese came online, their money was worth absolutely nothing and their market plummeted in one day. I've seen this scenario in real time, and I really believe this is what could be coming.
Well, yeah, and that's what he's talking about. And he's talking about could be this week, it could be next week, but that's really what's going on. When you're dealing with arbitrage and derivatives, you're dealing with a very, very complex set of mathematical equations. But let me tell you what, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what formula they're using. You end up without your pants, without your hope, without your future, and without your family. Now let's talk about xenogenesis, because changing men into monsters, the darkest money in the world, the deepest pockets in the world, are being orchestrated by the Prince of Darkness to produce a group of supermen, what Nietzsche called Ubermensch, okay? That was the whole purpose of Hitler's master race. And xenogenesis, not exogenesis. Exogenesis means apart from and introduced into. Xenogenesis is the production of an offspring entirely different from either the parents, and it's due to the addition of DNA from an alien or animal to the normal genome of the human being. Now, we're seeing all the comic book characters, Hollywood's pushing this, Iron Man, all these things are being pushed, but yet the U.S. military, through the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, is basically going for this stuff. Now, Dave, the oldest lie in the book is that we shall be as gods, knowing good and evil, and live forever. Well, that's what the entire Illuminati elite, Luciferian-worshipping scientific community is headed for. And I believe, and I said it at the beginning of the show, that the sophistication of mind control through neurochemistry, through the radio frequencies, and I'm not just talking about what we know is the standard radio frequency bands, but through stuff that we don't know, that we're being absolutely anesthetized. They used a word called narcosynthesis. That means that they give us an artificial reality or a virtual reality, and they put us to sleep, and we sleep unto death.
Well, we know that's going on, and in fact, Jose Delgado started perfecting that technology back in 1961 before he went to work for the CIA, and we've had numbers of people on this show talk about these programs, and they're not just mind control, Steve, they're disruptive to our immune systems.
Oh, absolutely. Now, again, xenogenesis, ladies and gentlemen, is the culmination of 40 years of my investigation. It's so important that you understand hard truths. It's so important that you understand the big lie. the reason they're pushing for AI, artificial intelligence. Singularity is the combining of human and machines. You probably remember the Star Trek movies, cyborgs, and the Borg period. You've got people that are now promising you're going to live forever. You're talking about the things that are happening in all of the different sciences to bring it into a nexus point. We're talking about the model society. We're talking about everything that Brave New World. And Dave, I've spent so much time on this that I got an email today, and I think this said it well. Guys, I think his name was Curtis, said, Steve, he said, this is the only book in my life I've ever read where I've got to stop at 4 pages, take a deep breath, and go, wow. And he basically thanked me for writing it. God bless you, because I believe it was directed by the Lord. Now, this book is different than anything because, again, it goes into such specific details, and I'm a footnoter. You're a researcher. This isn't, well, I think. No. This is what they know, this is what they're doing, and this is what it means. And, you know, Dave, it's just like weather, the weather that's going on around the country. When I wrote my book, Weather Wars and Unnatural Disaster, people didn't even understand the basis of the Air Force document, We Own the Weather 2025. They didn't understand all the patents that were out there, like HARP and all the offshoot patents. And they still don't get it when they see the East Coast being absolutely inundated with whatever they call the polar vortex. By the way, Montana's gotten that too. And the point is that we're absolutely now at this point in technology where Jesus said, if the days weren't shortened, there'd be no flesh left alive. And
right.
That no flesh left alive means their plan is to do away with the human race. And how flawed men think they can make something better than God made. When you listen to these men, the brightest men, the smartest men in the world that are talking about this stuff, they're as serious as you can get. So if you were a billionaire or a trillionaire, and there are trillionaires, what's the one thing you want more than anything? You want eternal life. But if you're a Luciferian, you know you can't turn on Lucifer and accept Jesus. Most of those guys are too far away. They couldn't. I mean, God can do anything, and maybe some of them will be saved. But they don't want to give up their money. And again, it's not the money, ladies and gentlemen. It's the control and the power they influence on other people's lives. That's why there has to be a false war.
Well, I don't know what track I was on at that point, but I got to share with you that, here's what's going on. This is the biggest money in the world. I think I was talking about if you were a billionaire or trillionaire, you'd want to basically, the one thing you want more is you want to have more good time. You want to have the best for eternity. So what's been promised is what's going to take place, but it's going to take place at the expense of all humanity. These entities, okay, I want to make it clear, it's tough to get people who are only focusing on the physical plane to understand the war that goes on in the heavenlies. The Bible says for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and spiritual wickedness in heavenly places. So what I've tried to do in Xenogenesis, and I think it's really well laid out, is that the horrifying future that basically is targeting God's original creation, they want to corrupt it. And evil forces hope to use what I've written about for 40 years, fallen angel technology, to shift the balance of power from God and mankind to Satan and his followers. And so I've maintained, Dave, that all of the myths and legends of antiquity, they're no longer going to stay on the pages of the books they're coming into our time and space. Because again, here's the thing that most people can't even reference. We're dealing with what we can see, what we can hear, what we can feel and touch. It used to be that the spirit stuff, outside of a seance or poltergeist or something like that, things moving around, telekinesis, that's what got people's attention. But now, if I told you how many emails in my email box in a given day of people rebuking demons, rebuking incubus, succubus, people having encounters with aliens. Now, my take on aliens is that they are demonic entities. They're not here for a good time. And if you look at the history of the alien phenomenon in the United States and pretty much worldwide, it always has a sexual connotation, just as the fallen angels who saw that the daughters of earth were fair. And, the point is I've written about that extensively, but what I like about xenogenesis is it tells everybody where we're at right now. There's nothing else I can write about it. It's even like there's a chapter 13 that was given to me by a dear friend of mine, Will, that basically he had a conversation with a dying CIA agent who was up in their technical, and I would say this, out-of-the-world division, and he was talking about the chemtrails and just how it's necessary to even manipulate and change the atmosphere so that those things that were once present on the Earth can come back into that presence. And that chapter is, interestingly enough, chapter 13, Under the Rainbow. And then we're talking a lot about, in this book, just if you see the whole thing with genetic modification and tattooing and the ideas of why people are starting to outpicture. Years ago, and I don't have a copy of it. Somebody probably has it, but I don't have a copy. I gave a word on the radio, and it was about the Lord was saying basically that the things of people's nightmares would become a reality. The invisible would be visible, and there would no longer be a barrier between them. And I read that in my Bible when Jesus said, behold, he gives us power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt us. So when you're talking about the Old Testament, the satyrs are mentioned in the book of Isaiah, Behemoth, Leviathan. There are some really big creatures mentioned. Now, what's going to happen is already taking place, and this is what I believe it has taken place. If I were to tell you human beings have been totally cloned and can be grown up to any age based on the acceleration of their mitochondrial cellular structures, and also that you can be downloading your collective subconscious into a new drone body, would you accept that?
Well, I happen to know it's true, so yes,
okay.
I would.
Well, yeah, okay. I'm sorry, it's rhetorical. So imagine that everybody you see isn't really the them, okay? Now, I'm not trying to play games with people's minds, and I'm not talking about a holographic universe. I'm not talking about the Matrix. But what's fascinating to me is a good example is when you see the news, mainstream news. And by the way, I don't know if I've introduced your listening audience to it, but I call those guys vomit brokers, okay? All they do is basically chew up and regurgitate the party line. You'll see the same headline, the same wording, the same inflection, the same images across the networks. Well, guess what? Somebody's controlling everything that goes out on the networks, including Fox. So the point that I'm trying to make in this statement is that if people understood that human beings have been cloned and that they exist in absolute incubatoriums underground throughout some of the most diverse and most difficult areas in the world to get to, and they understand that, let's say you take politician A and you replace him, but not only with his downloaded subconsciousness, collective conscious, but also, I would say, a hidden protocol in his software, then the point being is you can basically have an army of automatons doing your bidding. Now, some people say, well, that's way off base. I can tell you this, a four-star general said he was present in a meeting one night when I was discussing that on, I think it was on Coast to Coast, and basically he said, I watched two men, there was nothing he could do, get murdered when someone who heard you guys talking about that went into a fury. Well, the someone who went into a fury just happened to be one of the biggest named politicians in the history of the world, not an American president, but a global figure. So if that is the case, then that explains a lot. But also, if people understood that their television, it's not what you watch, it's what watches you. It's not the programming that you think is just a cute and quirky little cartoon or some sitcom. And by the way, I usually provide an H in front of the sit. But the point is that you're there. You go. You got it. The point is that you see that the fundamental values of America changed, and the family structure is changing. If you see the effeminization of mankind, if you see most commercials will show a man as a dork, almost like a subservient being, and a dominant woman, especially in a lot of the detective shows. And look, what I'm telling you is this, is that we're seeing a
phenomenal release of manipulation and control. And all the women's movement was nothing more than the spirit of Jezebel reasserting itself in our day and age. And when we walked in the ways of the Lord, when we acknowledged God, and I'm not going to take any crap from anybody. This country was great when we had the principles of the Founding Fathers. Look at what we have with no principles. Look at the lack of greatness. Look at the decay. And by the way, the Chinese absolutely mock the United States and have every reason to. You look at Beijing, you look at the great cities of China, and then you look at Detroit. Trust me, it's a big contrast. So what we're talking about now is in Xenogenesis, okay? And this book, again, is only available on my website. I don't sell it through Amazon, though they may show up there right now. And it tells you where we're at. There's no, and you know what, Dave? And this subject matter, there's nothing more that can be written. Doesn't mean someone can't come at it from another angle. But for the Christian and for the thinking individual, this is what's in play. And guess what? In order for this world to come into being, the old world has to be done away with.
And that's how our two topics tonight, I think, are related. It's the doing away with the old, ushering in the new.
Yeah, let me run through something for you, because again, this is courtesy of I think Hawk discusses, and this is really important. Okay. Most people have a hard time. You said that they just don't want to believe the Chinese are here or the Russians. And I'm just going to read this. Russian and Red Chinese have continued to come into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They're able to come in because of large clandestine hangars and continued above top-secret activities on that base. This past summer, Red Chinese troops were sighted and confronted in Berea, Kentucky, right on the way to Knoxville, and hence going into the Smoky Mountains area where Gatlinburg is located. Those teams of Red Chinese are also bioweapons specialists. One group of Russians last year came in on a plane that showed as a C-130. Then a Russian helo began to be seen, but at 30,000 feet. It has a maximum ceiling of 15,000 feet, so it had been turned on the radios or transponders inside the transport plane. Then that helo took off and landed at the old VOA, Voice of America facility, which is still operative. And a perfect English speaker took over from Andrews and began originating and fielding all high-frequency communications in continental U.S. for the next 14 hours. Then once he started, the helicopter went back and forth to Wright-Patterson. Now, the Spetsnaz...
Steve, again, I want you to review very quickly before we put a cap on Xenogenesis how people can get your book.
Well, they can go to my website, Steve Quayle, QUAYLE.com, and there's, order online, or tomorrow, my store hours are 9 to 5 Mountain. They can call us at, I'll go slow, 406-586-4842, 406-586-4842. But here's the bottom line. Right now, we have a cooperating mankind that are being controlled by seducing spirits. Is what Jesus and Paul said we'd be dealing with, Paul specifically, seducing spirits. And there's a replacement race that stands ready, Dave, to bring about the total annihilation of the human race. You cannot deal with robotics. And ladies and gentlemen, if you understood the advanced state of robotics, and by the way, again, some of the biggest money going into robots is from the pornography realm. You don't understand that pornography producing sex bots, again, the end result is the annihilation of the human race by forbidding the procreation through the human race, and those who get to be worker bees, well, who knows what they get for kicks. But the point is that the replacement race stands ready and poised to bring about the total annihilation of the human race. And that's my bottom line. And I develop it over, pretty close to 400 pages.
Amazing. Yep. And so stevequayle.com, and you've got the order page there, QUAYLE. And Steve, let's squeeze in a real quick call. Let's go to Art, and he's calling in, as he says, from off the grid. Hi, Art. Thanks for your patience.
Dave, why is it every time you have a broadcast that gets into these kind of things, it happens to be at the exact same time I decide to work on my gear?
Just call it coincidence, my friend.
Yeah.
What's on your mind?
Man, I tell Tell you what, I don't know. You make it so hard for me to stay on what I try to call in, because, I mean, I could talk about everything you've talked about for hours. You were talking earlier, you and Steve were talking earlier about the gun owners being one of the first targets and all. But there's another group of people that I'm not sure probably going to fall in that red list as well. Among the red, the red, blue, and green list. I think there's another group of people that are going to fall in the red list along with the gun owners. That's going to be people like myself, who's not only a gun owner, but micro broadcasters and people using ham radios and shortwaves for communications and building communication networks. Those people also are going to be a strong, hard target as well, because we're going to be the ones that are going to be coming together with their networks, trying to get information out to the people. And so,
let's let Steve respond to that particular point, and then we'll come back to you. Steve, what do you think about that?
Well, he's absolutely right, and we have the Nazis as a good example. The possession of a shortwave radio under Nazi Germany was basically instantaneous assassination. The thing that they want to do is cut off C3, command, control, and communication. And that's what they're trying to do right now. And they, in effect, as the military and police go to a trunk system and operation, whatever they call it, high rack or whatever, the point is that what is going to take place is anybody that can communicate the truth is at the top of the list. And hams, you guys, and by the way, there's a systematic execution of ham operators who have intel experience going on in the United States and around the world right now as we speak.
Amazing. What about Christians, Steve? Is that red list material?
At the top of the list. Dave, come on. The U.S. military has vilified first with the Mayak report, and then all of the, the shameful and shameful statements. Christians are at the top of the list. Look, this whole thing's orchestrated by Satan. It's orchestrated by the Lucifer-worshipping entities, and I'm not going to argue with anybody. Jesus said he watched Lucifer fall, and the thing is that there's a supernatural mindset to this evil, and these people believe in their devils more than the Christians will access the power of their God. Christians have been absolutely trodden underfoot. They have lost their, and I'm saying as a national referenced group of believers. They've kissed the bottom of the devil and embracing the purpose-driven church, and I say this right over the edge of a cliff. When you've got heresy like Chrislam erupting, when you've got the mega preachers and mega pastors not dealing with any of this stuff, as 200 to 300 million people lie in harm's way, I would just tell you this, dumb unto death, but now deliberately in the process of being destroyed. Christians are at the top of the list because we're the salt of the earth. And Jesus said if the salt loses its savor, it's henceforth good for nothing to be trodden underfoot of men. And by the way, the wars that are coming will be in the household of faith. The Catholic Church will undergo I'm not a Catholic, will undergo the greatest persecution they've ever known in their history. The Protestants will go through the equivalent of the 100 Years' War, and they'll probably compress that into 3.5 years, and it's going to be brother against brother, and it's going to be so horrific. So the only way to be led out of this dilemma is to absolutely prepare as if your life depends on it, because it does, and get the basics, food. Here's the golden rule on preparation. You want to be where everyone else isn't. When the stuff hits the fan, the last place you want to be, and I would say this before the stuff hits the fan, in a Walmart parking lot with pushing your cart of groceries out to your car or whatever, your truck, because someone's just going to say, forget this, I'm going to take their stuff. So you've got to prep ahead of time, and if you fail to prepare, you're basically signing your, how do I say this, one-way ticket to a camp.
Yeah, so, because that's how they're going to lure us in, isn't it? Art, time for one quick follow-up.
Well, I used to tell people I'm preparing to survive the storm, but I've come to accept the fact that I'm not preparing to survive the coming storm. I'm preparing to fight for life itself. And anybody who doesn't think that this xenogenesis is real, research Humanzy. That's where it all began.
Yeah, I know that Jesse Ventura did something on that. Thanks for the call, Art. Well, if you were to give people 3 things they can do immediately before this melts down into war in the Crimea or the Ukraine, and it spreads here, and then we're in a desperate set of circumstances, Steve, what are the 3 things you tell people they need to do?
Well, the first top of the list is they got to get right with God. No one can go through the mental, the emotional, and the attacks that are going to be upon us. And I know this, that the only one that I'm putting my faith and trust in is Jesus, who said to me, I am with you even to the end of the age, not the end of the world. Next thing you've got to do is you've got to look at this as Joseph did. Dave, you and I and everyone else who's been on talk radio, John Statmiller, in the early years, Mark Kornke, everybody that was warning about the days that would lie ahead, those days are here. You have to food. They are going to control you by food. You've got to have water and a water purifier. You have to have a basic way of staying. Look, you got to be fed, and you got to have a plan. You cannot just expect to basically sit in your living room when the Russian and Chinese who are here come house to house. And this is what's tragic. The war, see, here's what everybody's got to understand right now with Crimea and Kiev and the Japanese issue and the Chinese issue and every issue on the planet. As Pastor David Langford said, it's not that you have to go looking for it. It's coming looking for you. And there's a secret place, and it's Psalm 91, and I would encourage everyone to memorize that. Look, the just shall live by faith. It doesn't say the just shall live by government handout. The just shall live by his wits. The just shall live by his martial arts. The just shall live by Bushido. No. And I'm not taking a shot at martial artists. I'm just saying that, I was in it too. But the point is that there's always someone tougher, someone stronger, someone more competent, and someone more willing to go to the mat than you are. And you can be a bulldog, and they can be a Siberian tiger. So the point is, get right with Jesus, get your preps, and have money on hand. Those of you who live by just credit cards and debit cards, you're already sucked into the Borg. Have some pocket cash. Well, it's still good. As Jim Rawls said, cash will be king for 30 days, I think, and then cash will be trash. Have gold and silver if you can afford it, but only after you've done the basics, food, water, and warmth.
Very good. Steve Quayle has been our guest. His website is stevequayle.com.